Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Trevor Watkins. I'm the Global Head of Sports at multinational law firm Pinsent Masons, but also a devout AFC Bournemouth fan, and have been speaking with my colleagues here on the panel about various things in English football. They say that you should really be leaving the best to last. I firmly believe that we're going to get a great debate this afternoon. We've got some tremendous insight that will be given to us on soccer-specific stadia, the needs of individuals and fans, and looking to the future. To my far left, Jonathan Emmett from Gensler,
Afternoon.
also from England originally, albeit been here 26 years.
Bradford City fan.
Bradford City fan, will declare allegiances now. Jonathan and his practice, vastly experienced not just in designing soccer stadia, but also NFL and other sectors. Just in from Jonathan, we are very proud to have Jeff Birding, president of Cincinnati, new entrant to the MLS coming up, vastly experienced NFL background in a city that's had other new stadia put in. We have Chris Wright from Minnesota, also English and goalkeeper turned centre forward. He's just telling us Saturday goalkeeper, Sunday centre forward. Hull City player.
Hull City and massively interested in Manchester United, Derby County, and then obviously the Tigers, and whether or not they can stay up in the Championship League this year.
And Jen Johns from Atlanta. Jen's background on the Super Bowl organizing committee for next year. Very exciting. And of course, Atlanta, for those of you who've heard about it, seen it, Mercedes-Benz Stadium. Jen was integral in that process, the opening, the way it's operated. We're going to have hopefully a bouncy, lively discussion with people interjecting. We'll have questions later if we have a chance. But guys, I was out for breakfast this morning. I mentioned to you I saw a developer who used to have a team in America 15, 20 years ago. I said, soccer-specific stadia. He said, what a waste of time. What do you think, Jonathan?
I couldn't agree less. I mean, I think the notion of soccer-specific is really critical to the success of the sport here in the U.S. I think the term gets thrown around rather loosely, though. I think the notion of soccer-specific, maybe historically within the MLS, was revolving around the notion that the early teams, the early clubs, were playing in borrowed stadiums, playing in collegiate stadiums or NFL stadiums. You know, I think the notion of soccer-specific is highly relevant, but that doesn't mean that those are the only things that happen in those buildings. I think we're seeing more and more in all of the buildings that we've been involved in that it's incredibly important to make these buildings financially viable and really sort of integrate within the cities and the communities in a way that brings activity and really drives revenue beyond the soccer matches. But at the same time, they do have to be soccer-specific insofar as that is the primary focus of the building. Obviously, we're trying to sort of drive the sport, and so really having that focal point to build around is critical, but let's make these buildings work 365 days a year as well.
If we just take a contrary view then, I mean, Jen, Mercedes-Benz Stadium, it does have soccer in it, but my goodness, look at all the sports you've got there and the success you've had.
Well, Mercedes-Benz Stadium obviously was designed for both the NFL and MLS at the same time. From the get-go, always knew that it was going to be designed for both sports. With the World Cup in mind down the road, with concerts in mind as well, the goal is not to have dark days as much as it exhausts the operational teams. The folks at Mercedes-Benz Stadium have been phenomenal about connecting with fans on all levels to make sure that it meets all the needs for both sports.
And for you, just give the folks a bit of context. Capacity?
72,000.
Average attendance for the MLS team? 53,000, which would put most European soccer sides to shame. Chris, you're at the point where you're in the MLS, exciting vision, new stadium on the cards. I know you've got some images you'd like to share. Perhaps you could just talk us through where you're pitching the side.
Yeah, first of all, I want to go back maybe 2.5, 3 years when we were applying to get into the MLS. And there were two interested groups inside of the Minneapolis marketplace to try and get the award of an MLS franchise inside of that marketplace. One was obviously the football team, the Vikings, who were bidding with US Bank Stadium, so it would have been a very, very similar scenario to what has happened in Atlanta if they had been able to win the bid. However, an ownership group came together with a very, very different view, and really believed in, to a degree, Don Garber's vision of building soccer-specific stadiums in this country for a very unique fan base in every single market. And our owners decided that, and as a part of the bid for the franchise, we actually went with a theme of the game above all. And the ownership group really believed that this game should be played on grass. And that became central to our bid to win the award for an MLS franchise in Minnesota. The image that you now see in front of you is really the realization of that dream. 2.5 years later, Allianz Field is almost complete. It holds 20,000 fans on a game-by-game basis. Will open in the April of next year. That's an interior shot of about 3 days ago. Our grass has just gone in, grow lights are in place. It will be a beautiful, iconic, soccer-specific stadium built for this beautiful game. I do want to go to one other image, and if you could just move forward with the images, whoever is back there pushing the appropriate buttons. And maybe that actually is our supporter section down on the south end of the stadium. That's 2,800 safe standing areas for our fans. On the right-hand side, as you look at the screen, that's our premium stack with clubs inside of there. And then if we could go to the night vision of the stadium, the night look. One of the unique features, iconic features of the stadium is there is LED strips around something called a PTFE cover that allows us to light the stadium. Obviously, our base color is blue. That indicates that we're going to play. That's our game day, but also, if you can imagine the U.S. men's national team playing in the CONCACAF Gold Cup in June 18th, when they walk out, that will be able to go red, white, and blue. And so your team captain will walk out, that stadium will be red, white, and blue. If you're a Prince fan, we can go to purple. If you're Irish, we can go to green. We can do many, many different things with that coloring system, but it will be an iconic stadium, soccer-specific, once again, grass field built for our MLS team.
And Jeff, just again, helping the audience get some perspective. Cincinnati, you're coming from a team that's played in a different league, that's building up to be in the MLS. If you could just share, I mean, some of your attendance figures are incredible, and you've made a hard decision. We're going to be downtown in an urban area for the new stadium.
So we launched our team 3 years ago on the campus of the University of Cincinnati, playing in a college football stadium. Our first year, we averaged 17,000 a game, then 21. This year, 25,700. We're nearly at 20,000 season tickets for our first year in MLS. We had anticipated attendance in the 27 to 30,000 range every game. And then we'll play in the college stadium for 2 years and then move into a soccer-specific stadium right in the core of the downtown. Capacity probably right around 26,000, 26,500. And we believe that the soccer-specific stadium in the downtown core is integral to building our sport in this country. American fans are much more sophisticated. They've caught on to sort of the tradition and customs of soccer around the world, where it's played in a soccer-specific stadium in the heart of the downtown, where the experience is the bars, the restaurants, the neighborhood, the jobs, the people, all coming together in sort of a very tribal way. And that's how it's experienced in the rest of the world. And for us to build this sport in our country, our fans want to experience it the same way. And if we don't meet their expectations, we will not be successful. And so we're going to meet their expectations, and we're going to continue to grow the sport the way we see it around the rest of the world.
And Jonathan, for you, I mean, as an architect, is it the dream client that comes along and says, build me a stadium, and then tell me how much it's going to cost? But for you, I mean, I've been in that position. We were at Bournemouth and we built our 11,300 stadium, which we'll come back to later. But for you, what are the sort of 4 or 5 things that are top of the priority list now when the likes of Jeff or Chris or someone is coming to you and saying, what's state of the art? What can we achieve?
Well, I think it all starts with experience, as Jeff was saying. I mean, at the end of the day, we're really trying to base this all around that fan experience. And quite frankly, it's not about the dollar amount spent on a building. I mean, we've seen buildings within the league for less than 100 million, and we've seen some pushing 300. I mean, obviously with Atlanta, a little bit little higher than that. But at the heart of every one of these successful buildings around the league, it's really catering to the fans' needs. And I think what we always talk about early on in the project is, what does that mean to build in that particular city? The needs in Cincinnati are very different from Minnesota, very different from Los Angeles, where we recently completed LAFC. So every one of these cities has a different fan base. They're often looking for many of the same features. They're all connecting to the world's game. But it really has to be grounded within that local community, within the local neighborhood. I mean, again, the notion of being downtown, being really intertwined within the city is very, very important. And that's usually where we start the conversation about these projects. Building off of that, again, the soccer fan is incredibly sophisticated these days, but it's not one size fits all. So we really try very early on in the process to really identify the range of fans, the range of experiences that those fans are looking for in these buildings. We were talking before we came up about how even within the NFL and the other leagues, even as recently as 10 years ago, you either bought a general admission seat, a club seat, or a suite. You really had 3 choices out there in the marketplace. Now, even with a building like LAFC, which is 22,000, very similar in scale to these 2 projects, we have 23 different offerings within that building. And obviously, that's that particular market. And again, working with the client, working with the team to really identify what that product mix, what that experience mix for the particular location and the particular club is really critical to that success.
And Jen, is there anything you'd pick out in terms of when you look at Mercedes-Benz, for example, anything you'd say, well, actually, we tried that, we did it differently for the soccer fan, and it's really worked? Because I think the audience coming from multiple countries will learn a lot from that decision.
I think the one thing that stands out to me is not something we just did for the soccer fan, but we did it for all fans. We did a considerable amount of research to both user groups, and the one thing that was the #1 pain point in previous stadiums that fans absolutely wanted was better food and beverage pricing. And the food and beverage program at Mercedes-Benz Stadium, thanks to Arthur Blank's dedication to the fan, has really reduced pricing to what we're calling, I guess, what they call fan-first pricing. And one of the reasons I bring it up is because now, as a tenant of the stadium working on the Super Bowl, the pricing that is $2 for a hot dog, $2 for a bottle of water, unlimited refills in soft drinks, etc., is the same price point for a major sporting event like the Super Bowl as it is for a soccer game, as it is for an NFL regular season game.
And is that contracted out to a third-party provider, or do you have your own company to do that?
We work with Levy to make sure that that's possible, and it's basically groundbreaking. They've never done something like that before, but it's actually come back to help us with elevated per caps. People are staying in the stadium longer. They come in earlier. They don't stay outside. They don't go somewhere else to eat before they come in. They come in, they're part of it. They buy more retail. It's worked for Mercedes-Benz Stadium. Has been very happy with it.
I mean, Chris, it's interesting for me as a European, because, as you too, probably, experience of English football, for example, where you're lucky if you can buy a coffee at halftime, and you can maybe buy a beer, but you can't take it into the stadium. And it's usually very, very basic choices. I was intrigued by the sort of artisan lead, the quality lead. How are you bringing that into the new Minnesota Stadium?
Well, Jen raises some really interesting things about Arthur's commitment to sort of pricing for fans. In Minnesota, it's a little bit of a more different approach, but the overriding statement that I would make is that food and beverage used to be something that you had when you went to games. Now it's a reason to go to games. And so all of us in our respective seats are basically looking to try and tell a food and beverage story that is native to where your stadium is. So our food and beverage story has got to be farm to table because 62% of our audience are millennials, and they wonder where their food comes from. Also, we have major pressure from the area where we're building the stadium to bring in local ethnic foods. If anybody were to guess how many languages are spoken in Minnesota, somebody just throw a hand up and have a guess. How many languages are spoken in Minnesota? 5. 251. There are 251 languages that are spoken in Minnesota. So we have a very, very ethnically diverse marketplace that we've got to appeal to. All of those people have their favorite teams from whence they came. Whatever countries they have come from, they have their clubs. We want to be their local club. When they come into our stadium, how do we greet them with something that is near and dear to their heart, which is food and beverages? And so we've got to make their experience really authentic inside of our stadium. We've got to become their team, but then the next most important thing around the team itself and the performance of the team is really the experience inside of the stadium, and food and beverage really is a big, big part of that. So there'll be a lot of ethnic foods inside of our stadium. The beers inside of our stadium, 3 different surveys. Number 7, only once on one of the 3 surveys, came up with a traditional American beer. Every single other beer on there was craft beers. We could be the first stadium in the country that goes totally craft. No traditional American beers inside of our stadium. Why? Because that's what our fans are demanding from us.
And Jeff, obviously you're on that curve of deciding what your stadium's going to look like, how it's going to be shaped, and no doubt there'll be some similarities with Minnesota. What is it that's driving you in terms of how you make a decision about the size of the seats, the number of boxes? How are you approaching that?
We have 2 key principles in our design. One is the fan experience, which Chris just spoke well of, and the other, frankly, is monetize the building. Because in soccer, you have to drive local revenue. We don't have the enormous national deals, television broadcast rights. And so in order to have a club that's invested in the community and has a quality product, you have to drive the local revenue. Segmentation is a key part of it. Everyone has different needs. We have to meet the consumer's needs. So whether it's the corporate crowd, high wealth, young professionals, millennial, our supporter section, our family section, trying to tailor different design elements to meet the needs of those fans is very important. Some are very common when you talk about technology, and some of them are very unique. I do think culture is changing. It's reflected in our approach to buildings. People have shorter attention spans. They want everything in an instant. And so that changes the way we look at concessions. It changes the way we look at restrooms. It changes the way we look at ingress and egress. How are we getting fans easily into the stadium? And it's more of the door-to-door, all-in experience, as opposed to maybe 20 years ago where you just sold a ticket to the game. And it was just the game. And just come to the game and cheer for your team and go home. And we'll sell you some beer and while you're at the match. So it's a little more complicated, but I think in a positive way, because it allows you to really build loyalty if you're really going out of your way to meet fans' needs.
Yeah, I mean, that is fascinating. Certainly my team, Bournemouth, I mentioned the 11,300 stadium, which we still have. We play in the Premier League. But because we get £120 million a year, which is what, about 150, 160 million dollars, depending on Brexit and the currency rate today, it doesn't really matter to us, arguably economically, how many seats we have in the ground. But as you've mentioned, Jem, with 70-something thousand capacity, planning that fan engagement, that fan journey, presumably it doesn't just start and end with 9 o'clock on a Sunday morning or whatever time the fan comes into the ground and then goes home.
No, it actually starts with the moment they make plans to attend. So the online experience, the app experience, the messaging we're providing to that fan as in emails to say, you're clearly coming to this game. If you're coming, this is where you need to go. This is what you need to do. This is what's happening on the ground that day. This is what's happening pre-game to entice them to come early, how to get there, where to park. All of that fan experience and that journey starts well before at the time they bought their ticket or before that, they've got access to that information. The game day portal is always up and running 48 or longer before each game. And that's something we're continuing with Super Bowl as well, to make sure that all of our fans know exactly how to be part of that process days in advance.
I mean, Chris said something to me earlier that worried me. That he said, I'll know what ticket you want to buy before you go to try and buy it. I mean, what level of knowledge are you going to have about your supporter base, Chris?
Yeah, and I think Jan raises some really good things, and I would argue actually it starts even before 9 o'clock in the morning. It starts with, for those of you that are in the room that are either looking at a renovation or building a new stadium, market research on who your fans are is really, truly important. Jeff has already touched on it. Market segmentation. We're deep into trying to find out who truly all of our fans are, and we want to get to know them individually. And so therefore you've got to have a front end and you've got to have a back end that backs all of that up. So number one, inside of our shop, we use something called Core Technologies. We use SeatGeek as a ticketing system. We use Salesforce as a way to reach out to all of the consumers of our product. So you've got to decide that if you are going to go in that direction, then you've got to have a Wi-Fi and a DAS accessible building. You can't afford any of the 20,000 people that are in your stadium to try and go online and post an image of themselves during the game and not have access to being able to hit send and it goes. And so, we've developed a relationship with a company called Atomic Data. We've developed a very, very expensive Wi-Fi system inside of our stadium, 420 access points, which is greater than any other team inside of our league, probably with the exception maybe of the bigger stadiums, so that every single one of our 20,000 fans has access to Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, etc. Why? They're your marketing people. Every single time that they reach out to their communities and they hit send to their 120, 140, 160, whatever it is, followers, then obviously they're your marketing machine. To build all of that infrastructure, you need a vision. Now, going back to Trevor's point, depending on what information we have about Trevor and his buying habits inside of the stadium, we can score Trevor. We know what the types of things are that he is buying and how much he is spending inside of the stadium. So when our reps reach out to him, we basically know then the price points that he is already buying in, and therefore we just want Trevor to buy more. And we do it in a very professional way, but we're allowed to then score the data that we have through the system that we have on every single consumer that we have to really understand what his propensity is to buy a certain product inside of the stadium, including tickets. So that's what I was talking about before. It's a little bit Big Brother-esque, but the aggregation of data is very, very important these days so that you can treat every consumer individually.
I mean, interesting, Jeff, for you, again, because you're now looking, you're making your decisions, what areas are you determined to reach out on? Where are the targets for you for building that fan base further from the great start you've had?
So we have our segments. Obviously, every soccer club has their supporters section, their supporters culture. The Bailey, when we launched our club, that was a big focus because we thought they would be a siren call to sports fans in Cincinnati who had no idea what a soccer match felt like, sounded like. Obviously, the business community was a key piece for us because of the civic pride in making something successful in Cincinnati. And then the youth soccer crowd, where we have an enormous number of youth soccer families, boys and girls, who had never had that professional club at a high level. They'd seen it on TV. Maybe they aspired, just didn't know that it could happen in Cincinnati. I think the one other aspect of Chris's point is the data doesn't, maybe for some, they're going to sit in the supporter section every game. Or it's a company and they're going to buy a suite and that's going to be their suite for every game. But a lot of consumers want to try different experiences within the season. And so one week they may be in the family section with their family. Next week they might be in club seats with their buddies. Yep. And the next week they have their company maybe in a suite. And so how do we design a stadium and an experience program from a ticketing standpoint that allows folks to move around and experience different elements of the building? The building almost becomes like a city. And so there are different neighborhoods with different needs being met within each part of the city with a little bit of its own tribal experience. But then collectively, it is one big tribal experience. It is Cincinnati coming together in support of our club against the cities that are coming to town. And that makes it a lot of fun because you really get to open it up through the use of data in the design of the building.
So just of interest, because similar situation. Premier League team, Bournemouth, will sell out most games. We have 7,000, 8,000 season ticket holders. That makes accessibility, if I want to take my daughter, or my oldest daughter, very hard. How are you balancing we're going to sell these number of tickets for the season against the casual walk-up, maybe the away fan?
Yeah, so we've been blessed with 2 years in a third-party stadium. So we've played in the University of Minnesota football stadium for 2 years. In our first 2 years, while we've been building that incredible stadium called Allianz Field, we did an awful lot of work and an awful lot of market research on really what we wanted our season ticket holder capacity to be inside of Allianz Field, and then how we certainly wanted fans on a casual basis to be able to come through our stadium from a single game and a group standpoint, so that we could continue to build awareness of our sport, the growth of our sport, and the fan base for the future. So we leveraged the stadium in TCF Bank, saying that we were going to cut off our fan base, our season ticket base, at 14,500. We got to that number with no problems whatsoever. Jeff's number is even more impressive than this. But then we developed something called the Preserve, which is our wait list. So we now have over 3,000 people on our wait list to try and get season tickets in Allianz Field. But we are going to sell the other 4,500 seats that we have on a single game basis into groups, so that we can continue to build that data bank on all of these people who we want to have involved with our game. The other piece of it from a fan experience standpoint, though, and Jorge mentioned it, and Ian Ayre mentioned it relative to Nashville, and I know that Cincinnati is considering this, but we're building a massive fan experience area outside of the stadium. We believe that 4,000, 5,000, 6,000 people will want to come to our games who can't get in. But then the question is, how do you attract them to the stadium on game day and build an experience for them outside of the stadium? We have something called a Great Lawn, and we're going to program this Great Lawn every single game with something that attracts people to big screen TVs, stadium-style seating, so that they can watch the game and be around the game, but not actually in the game. So, it's a lot of work, it's a lot of planning, but our job is to pack the stadium so you've got an incredible atmosphere, but then also build a fan base by having something for them to come to on the outside of the stadium.
Jeff, Jen, do you want to add to that at all?
Well, I think Atlanta United has done an amazing job with selling out season tickets to the point that they're at max capacity there, but all they need to do is then open the upper deck to allow for single game seats that would allow them to capture data. I'm not part of that institution, but I can say that it's an amazing feat when 72,000 people are all in the stadium, and you know that a lot of them are able to come in game after game as season ticket holders, but then capturing that data of those other people that are rotating through. Another thing that I think it's part of all of what, it's at least part of the Atlanta United app, is that you can sell through your tickets to a third party. When you sell through to a third party and they accept the transfer of tickets, that data is captured as well. So then they've got the one-off single game user that I transferred my tickets to you, and then they've got your data as well. Yeah. So that's an unlimited stream of people who are just trying it out on a single game basis as a friend of a friend who got those tickets for free, but now that they've experienced it, they're now a target for the larger matches.
Jeff?
I would just offer, I think one of the key values of our sport is that we are inclusive. And part of inclusive has to be accessible to people of all incomes. And so when we talk about the experience, making sure, as Chris is doing, you're capping season tickets, part of it is because not everyone can afford season tickets. But that doesn't mean you want to exclude their opportunity to come in and experience the beauty of our sport, their love of their club. And so, at least for us, having that high segmentation allows us to monetize the high end where there's more opportunity to have the better seats, the more exclusive experiences, and driving revenue as best we can in that manner, in effect, then allows us to have seats that are inclusive of and accessible to everyone. And I think that that's a big part. I spent almost 20 years in the NFL, and even the entry price point was out of the reach of a lot of working families, young professionals. I think soccer, we're better grounded. You know, I make the point that the NFL seems like the sport that's at the top of the mountain in that big shiny castle, and soccer is in the neighborhood pub, right down with working people, where the steel mills and the neighborhood, and there's the soccer pitch. We need to make sure we're always attuned to that.
Jonathan, you're getting quite a good wish list here for you. I mean, picking up on culture, for example, and also technology. I mean, culture, does it change between sports when you're designing a stadium and what you're delivering? Technology, what are you seeing that is causing you to have to think about new design?
Yeah, I think culturally there's a big difference across every sport, and working currently pretty much in every major league, we're seeing different pushes and pulls. Certainly within the NFL, Major League Baseball is certainly going through its challenges, largely due to the number of games per season, the length of the game. I think in a lot of ways, soccer really has an advantage over many of the other sports here in the US because of those factors. It's a limited number of games. There's a set amount of time. It's a short duration. And I think that drives a lot about what we can really build the sport on here in the US. And I think it's been largely, a part of the success of attracting the millennial fan base and the younger fan base, which is obviously driving MLS today. And I think what we're seeing is that we need to then accommodate those needs and those desires within the soccer-specific buildings to really sort of address that fan base, which is very different from a baseball fan or an NFL fan in that respect. I do think, though, that in terms of technology has a place in every one of the leagues, but it's maybe applying it in a little bit of a different way. One of the things that really resonated with me working with Peter Gruber, one of the owners of LAFC, was he really cautioned us to not let technology get in the way of the experience of being at the game. Technology really needs to support and enhance it, but almost recede to the background where you're not aware that technology is really at work. To quote his words, he says, "We're analog people. We want an analog experience." You know, the whole value of going to a soccer match is to really participate in that experience of being there with 20,000 other people or 70 other thousand fans, having that shared personal experience. Sometimes technology can get in the way of that. I mean, how many concerts have you been to where everyone's standing there with the cell phone, looking at the artist through the phone and forgetting to actually just enjoy the moment and be a part of it? So I think as a designer, and I think many on the ownership side too, really have started to feel, how do we use technology to enhance that personal experience, that visceral experience of sharing the ability to be there in person at these games and not just rely on the technology to sort of overwhelm and take over the full experience.
It's interesting for me. Great debate. Obviously, financial models are different around the world. When you look at the cost of the Stadia, compare it to the fact you could probably buy a decent European soccer side for less than you're paying on a stadium. And I know there's been a shift here between public-private money. Is the building of a stadium sustainable? General question. Chris?
I think the building of a stadium is a must. I think it's a must for the sport. I think it's a must for our sport to grow. I think soccer-specific stadiums in our future, I really hope that Commissioner Garber holds his foot on that gas pedal. I'm excited about the way that in the future this sport can grow in stadiums that are built for the beautiful game, our game, the game of soccer. Are they sustainable? Yes, they are. But I think that you've got to be creative. I think that Jonathan and Gensler and Populous and other companies like this have got to sort of lead the way in helping us devise a footprint inside of a stadium that allows us to do multiple things. In Minnesota, I know that there will be a lot of bands, pick your poison, that will want to play in a 20,000 seat outdoor stadium. whether or not we can accommodate that and whether or not technology would allow us to sort of be protective of our playing surface, et cetera, et cetera. Don't know yet, but our intent is to go down that path. Are we going to host maybe major collegiate football games inside of a 20,000-seat grass stadium? Yes, we are. Are we looking at lacrosse? Yes, we are. Are we looking at rugby? Yes, we are. Are we looking at drone racing? Yes, we are. We're looking at all sorts of things that attempt to make sense of this very complex business model. And then the outlier is public-private. Is there public money available to help you build these incredible facilities, or are you going the private route and trying to figure out a very, very complex business model if it's only private money? We decided to go in that direction. We have $450 million into this thing, not just the stadium, expansion fees, mixed-use development, 30 acres around it, et cetera, et cetera. It's a very, very complex business model to make that work. Will we make it work? Yes, we will.
What about for you, Jeff? Cincinnati, how is it going to be sustainable for 10, 20 years from now?
Well, I do think it differs market to market.
Okay.
I think it depends on the deal. It depends on the club and the ownership of the club. It depends on your stadium site. If you have a stadium site with a limited footprint and all it is your stadium, you may have a much harder time making it sustainable. In Cincinnati, we're again, not only are we downtown, but we have area around our stadium to be able to make a mixed-use development to create a stadium district that's neighboring a Renaissance district already existing in the heart of our downtown. That gives us opportunities that maybe not every club has. Times have definitely changed. The politics here are much, much harder. When I was involved leading the stadium effort in 1995-96 to get public funding, approved a tax increase for the Reds and Bengals stadiums, we got 62%. The political opinion of those deals has changed dramatically. I would imagine not only in Ohio, but in other parts of the country. So the public infrastructure is probably as much as you're going to get. So in Cincinnati, we got some public help with parking. You think of all the utilities and some of the infrastructure, land costs, and there's an opportunity there because that's not inconsistent with other sorts of mixed-use developments where governments will come in and do some support, public support, in order to help make that private investment happen. And realizing the return on the private investment, and you're just doing some public seed money to help support it and get it off the ground. We also have $450-some million invested, and it's a long play. It's a legacy investment. We think that where the future of the league and our sport is going and what will happen with our mixed-use development around our stadium certainly makes it a worthy investment. But again, if we were on a different site with limited opportunities, we might feel a little bit differently. But we were willing to make this investment because we're betting on our sport and we're also betting on our city.
Jonathan, just in a different context, sustainability, climate change, despite what the president might think here, we're seeing evidence of that across Europe, across the world. Where is that leading you in terms of design and the way in which you make stadiums efficient?
Well, it's obviously a very big challenge, and I think the first challenge is just, again, getting back to the use of these buildings. They're inherently not a sustainable model insofar as you look at an NFL stadium that's maybe used for 10 major events a year. That is not sustainable in and of itself. So absolutely the first thing that we can do to make these buildings more sustainable is use them more. I mean, that is really, really an important factor at play. I think the other side of it is there's more demand, again, with a younger audience, with the fans who are coming to these buildings. They are demanding that these buildings be socially responsible, sustainable buildings within their communities. And so it's absolutely incredibly important that we as architects, designers, and as clubs are really addressing those needs in a very deliberate way. We can do that within the buildings, obviously just the technologies, when it comes to, mechanical systems, electrical systems, lighting. Water conservation is obviously a very, very important aspect of that, and every one of the buildings that the four of us have been involved in, water conservation and water reuse is really critical to that. But again, I go back to the notion that it's about using these buildings is really the most sustainable approach we can really take to the.
I mean, Jen, for you, and I'm going to go slightly off-piste as we get towards the last few minutes. You've worked in soccer, you've worked in the NFL, and you're now in the privileged position where you've got one of the world's major sporting events. You're involved in the organizing committee for Atlanta next year. Tell us a little bit more. What's the fan experience that you're going to provide for the Super Bowl? What is really driving that?
Well, the Super Bowl is made up of 150 events over a 10-day span of time. There's official events that the NFL are part of. There are sanctioned events that the NFL allows you to mention the fact that it's part of the Super Bowl. And then there's non-sanctioned events that have nothing to do with us, but maybe Rolling Stone as a party every year. Focusing primarily on all of the official events that are part of the Super Bowl, that provides a fan experience outside of the 70,000 people that are just able to get a ticket at a minimum of $5,000 a ticket to get into the building for that event. There are milieu of events that people can choose from outside of that. My favorite is Super Bowl Live, which is a free event that'll be held over a 6-day span of time for the week prior to the Super Bowl. It's held at Centennial Olympic Park, and it's making sure that everyone from local citizens to guests that are coming from whatever 1 or 2 cities who are either the Falcons or another team, or 2 teams, will join us in Atlanta to have a chance to be part of something, even if they don't have tickets to the game. We want to make sure there's something for everyone. In doing so, there's also Super Bowl experience, which is in every Super Bowl market as well, and that's a $35 ticket that really allows you to embrace the sport, embrace the game, see previous and current players, sign autographs, etc. Those events specifically are both for locals and for our guests. And in building that experience, we're making sure that they have decently priced food and beverage, that we're sharing that information, and making sure that, once again, a doorway-to-doorway experience is easy and welcome for them.
I think simply that answer does show that whether it is NFL, whether it is soccer, some great thoughts, some great trends. We've got about a minute to go. Do we have any questions from the floor before we begin to wrap up? Question in the front row. Are there microphones at all? Or if you could shout I think they are bringing a microphone to you. If you could just say who you are, where you're from, that'd be great. Thank you.
Hi, Michael Ryan. I'm coming from Detroit, Michigan. But Jeff, I'm a Xavier grad and former West End resident.
All right.
After graduation, and was an inaugural season ticket holder.
Thank you.
So congratulations.
Thank
1.
you.
2, so many, specifically from my experience being a soccer fan growing up in the Midwest as well, rivalries can be 6 hours away from each other. How, and comparatively to a city like London, where there are multiple teams within a few miles of each other, specifically in Cincinnati, of Xavier and University of Cincinnati, that have this very intense rivalry 2.5 miles away from each other. How do you navigate the geography differences in an area of the United States like the Midwest, that the closest team to you outside of Columbus and Cincinnati being an hour and a half away, it could be 6, 7, 8 hours, and how do you navigate the geographies of those regions?
So Peter, is that from a fan experience perspective?
Fan experience, yes.
So Jeff, maybe first of all, away fans at your grounds or not?
We welcome them. Every MLS club will have a supporter area. I was at LAFC, LA Galaxy, brilliant environment. So certainly we want that to happen, and as the league continues to grow, there'll be more opportunities for that. I think the biggest thing is that the experience really is tribal, and whether or not there's representatives of the other tribe there or not, it is still this experience. We're in the memory business, and we give people great memories. And you can sit in a dark movie theater and watch a movie and walk out and really not have any life memories to take away, or you can sit in our stadiums for 2 hours and have these brilliant memories that connect people, whether within their family or within their friends, around this shared passion where the team becomes this cultural manifestation of your pride in your community. And so, yeah, it's a little more visceral when there's some people from the other club sitting right down the way, and that's intense and beautiful. We had a little bit of that when we beat Chicago Fire on penalty kicks in the Open Cup. But for the most part, you can't make that beyond what the league allows.
Chris, do you find that you have your local team that your supporters love to hate up the road like you do in England?
I think it's really organic, and I think the fans and the supporters will tell you who your rival is. And in Minnesota, it should be Kansas City, and it's not. It should be Chicago, and it's not. Guess who it is? It's Atlanta, because we came into the league at the same time as Atlanta did. They're playing in a football stadium. We're playing in a soccer-specific stadium. We have 20,000 fans. They have 72,000 fans. They hate Atlanta, for a lot of different reasons. And that's great. It's great that there are these incredible rivalries that are built out of the fans' passion for following your team against a particular opponent.
That's great. And I'm being told now that that is enough, unfortunately, because we're heading towards the end of a great Soccerex here in the USA. I'd just like to thank the panel, Jonathan, Jeff, Chris, Jen. I mean, I think it's been a fascinating debate. Thank you all for coming, particularly towards the end of a Friday afternoon. That's all for now.
Thank you.